Thank you so much, David. That was beautiful. So it is such an honor to be able to be here to this loving community today and be talking about the great Advent-ure of Love. I've gotten to know you all. I've been a part of this community since July, and you're all amazing. I've watched how you reach out to each other. If anyone ever has a challenge or a problem, and you step up and take care of each other, and you've transformed your physical church into a thriving virtual church because of COVID. And the main feeling we all have in this community is a sense of connection and love. And that is not an accident. That is an intention. It is an honor to be a part of it. And it is certainly a great adventure. Advent is related to the word adventure. It's like the wise men were traveling this arduous journey together, our grand adventure across the desert of our human ego experience, welcoming the rebirth of our divine loving essence, our Christ consciousness. And we're all remembering, especially at this time of year, that our real human adventure here is a call to love always, to love anyway. I used to believe back in my 20s and 30s that the grand adventure of being human could be found in climbing the 14,000-foot peaks of the Colorado Rockies, which I did in my 20s, or by scaling the 1,000-foot rock walls of El Dorado Canyon in Colorado, where you could stand on a tiny inch nubbin of rock, and that was all that kept you from a rapid soul exit. And I had friends who climbed Everest back then, and I lived in that world of outer adventures. And what I've learned since then is that our greatest and hardest adventure here is our inner adventure of turning inward and remembering that we are all here to be sources of unconditional love, no matter how anyone behaves, no matter how challenging our lives are, that we are those sources of Christ consciousness, pure love that Mother Mary gave birth to at Christmas. That is the symbol of all of us rebirthing our Christ consciousness. And as we've all learned here on earth, every moment of this journey is about a call to love. I think Marianne Williamson coined that term many years ago, that every relationship we have, even those that trouble us, are a call to love that person. Every failure we think we've experienced here on earth is a call to love ourselves, that we are here on this earth to focus on the invisible, to learn to look beyond personality, beyond ego, beyond ideas, behaviors, appearances, to focus on the invisible, to focus on the soul. So how are we doing with that earthly adventure? Well, I can tell you, I think it's harder than the mountain climbing. I think it's harder than climbing Everest. I think that we all have trouble sometimes turning inward instead of watching the world and being troubled by it. And yet in unity really shines in its ability to teach that we have to go inward. We have to turn to prayer. We have to sit in daily meditation. We have to listen in the silence in order to reclaim our Christ consciousness, to rebirth it, so to speak. So there's another way I like, as many of you know, I studied Hinduism for a long time, and there's a great term that they use, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, namaste. Do you remember that term? And you know what that means? It means the divine in me honors the divine in you. It's another way of saying, I see the God spark in you, and you see the God spark in me. That is looking beyond appearance, really focusing on the invisible, seeing people as spiritual beings first. And that's how we recognize their spark of God. And that allows us to interact with anyone from a whole different place, beyond personality, beyond ego, to recognize that we are all children of God. We all have this God potential in us. And it's who we came here to be in this great adventure of being human in the physical world, of having an ego that battles that divine love every step of the way. And yet, how ironic that we use our ego to go on great adventures, and ultimately those adventures return us to love, to the place where we know that only love can save us. Only love can save the world. And this doesn't mean love of the humankind, of the ego, of the personality. When we think of the teachings of Jesus, do you remember that beautiful story where he was walking through a crowd of people and a woman who had been sick for years touched the hem of his garment, and without Jesus doing anything, she was instantly healed? How do you think that happened? How does a person like Jesus embody so much love, carry such a high vibration of love, that just being in the presence of that is healing? Well, Jesus's consciousness of love was his intention here. It was his purpose. He taught us about this inner kingdom. He said that we all have this, and that if we raise our loving vibration to align with this God kingdom that lives within us, we are capable of healing ourselves and ultimately the world. We can do this. We can do this in our prayer. You know, today Don was talking about the power of prayer in our community. And as you all know, in Unity, the first thing we do when we go to pray for someone is we raise our own vibration to the highest vibration of love. And then we bring the other person into that loving space with us as we pray for them or with them, and it raises their vibration. That is the gift that Jesus gave us, the way shower, showing us that we were capable of transforming this physical world when we embraced the divine love that is our Christ consciousness, our essence. So all of us here know that prayer changes everything, but I also hope we remember that it mostly changes us, the person praying, because it lifts our vibration so very much. It marinates us in the vibration of Jesus, of the vibration of Christ consciousness. And that is the only way to shift anything here in the physical world. And all of you know that time and again, this was the message Jesus gave us. He called us to love. He modeled for us how to love even those who persecute us. As Eric Butterworth wrote in his book, Discover the Power Within You, he wrote, Jesus was the great example, not the great exception. The same Christ essence that was in Jesus is also within you and me. It's also within every person on the planet, no matter how they may be behaving. We are all Christ in potential. And Jesus's great example showed us that what he could do, we can do. And so to express our fullest capacity for Christ's love, we have to release that attachment that we get when we land in the physical world to personality, to appearance, to ego. We have to release that through prayer and meditation. You know, in my life, I could probably honestly say that the best part of growing up Catholic for me was that the Catholics loved Mother Mary, and they embraced, at least when I was growing up Catholic in the 50s and 60s, Mother Mary was a prominent figure, as prominent as Jesus was. Some of you know I went to Catholic school, Convent of Mercy, for 12 years of my education. And of course, yes, I thought I was going to be a nun, at least until I saw the Beatles on TV. Then I knew I had to have a different life. but but in the beauty of the Convent of Mercy childhood that I had, every Friday we said the rosary to Mother Mary. We prayed to her to lift us above our problems and challenges, to help us give birth to our higher consciousness. And I loved that so much that Mother Mary statues were all over my high school. The beautiful woman with the long blue and white robes, holding her hands in prayer, looking at us with loving kindness. That meant so much to me growing up. And I learned early on in my journey that I could sit in the presence of Mary in my prayers. I could embrace her energy of loving compassion in my daily prayers, in my rosary. Do you remember that ceremony? Well, if you grew up Catholic, in May, we crowned Mary with blossoms, Queen of the Angels, Queen of the May. That was the most beautiful ceremony that the Catholics did when I was growing up. And so Mary really was my healer when I was becoming of age. And she brought to me the love that I wanted and needed. My mother was exhausted and personally wounded and had a hard time loving me. But my divine mother, Mary, was always there for me. Every time I went to her, Hail Mary, full of grace, she was there. And this is here for you. These beautiful female deities, whether we call it Mother Mary or Kuan Yin from the Buddhist tradition or Lakshmi from the Hindu tradition, these are all the embodiment of compassionate, loving kindness. And especially Mother Mary in unity represents the divine motherhood of love, or we could say giving birth to love. She also represents intuition. So when we struggle to find love and compassion for this crazy world, we can intentionally sit in the energy of the divine feminine. In my house, I have a little corner in my meditation space that is all female deities, and it's Mother Mary, Kuan Yin, Lakshmi, my own mother, many of the women in my life who've been healers. And that's the place I go to really reconnect and marinate with my loving compassion, my loving kindness. In the Hindu tradition, they create an entire shrine. It's actually a separate room usually that's called the Ma Shrine, M-A. I just love that. And when you walk into that space, it's got all the female deities. The ashram that I spent a lot of time in the 80s had Mother Mary, Kuan Yin, Lakshmi, all the female deities from all the traditions. And when you walked into that room, into that space, it was so filled with sweetness. And you could sit in that in meditation and prayer and just remember who you are, your true essence as a loving being. And if you were in conflict with anyone, you could bring that conflict to meditate in the Ma Shrine. And when you were in there, you would feel ultimate forgiveness and compassion for that person. And so then you could leave and go out and take action based on that loving kindness. We all have access to this in your own home. You can even build a little shrine to your female deities, the women who've healed and helped you, to the Divine Mother Mary, and bring this as your consciousness of giving birth this Christmas season, that you are the Mother Mary giving birth to your Christ consciousness and to the world's Christ consciousness. I think it's so interesting that these female deities embody this loving, compassionate energy, because, as you know, I've told you before, my husband is the greatest guy on earth until he gets in traffic, right? And then he can become really, really irritating because he gets mad at all the other drivers. So I recently gave him this idea that whenever he was driving and somebody was annoying him, to picture that driver as a grieving mom. And here's the reason why. I have worked with hundreds of grieving mothers, And they all tell me a story that when their child departed, they couldn't get out of bed for weeks, for months. And finally, there was a day where they decided they were going to have to go back into the world. They tried to put on some clothes. Most of them tell me they just put on sweatpants, that they hadn't washed their hair in weeks. And they tried to get in their car and maybe go to the grocery store. And all they needed was for somebody to be sweet to them, someone to encourage them that they could do this, that they could be in the world in spite of their pain and their loss. I still get emotional because I remember hearing these stories from my grieving moms. And if somebody honked the horn at them for driving badly that day, it could send them back home for another month to grieve and to feel that they couldn't be out in this hard physical world. And so you want to live this physical life knowing that everybody around you is carrying a pain, a grief that is devastating them in some way, no matter how they may drive or how they may take too much time in the cashier line. Everybody here just needs loving kindness to know they can get through their day. This is our great inner adventure, this inner adventure to turn back to our loving mastery over the physical world, mastery over the limited self, mastery over the wounded heart. This great adventure we're on together. You know, I know some of you know that I'm going to talk about the Beatles because the Beatles were my people in this lifetime. And what I have found so amazing about Paul McCartney and John Lennon is, maybe you know this, but Paul McCartney's mother died of breast cancer when he was 14. And John Lennon's mother died of she was hit by a car actually right in front of John's house when he was a teenager. And these two wounded adolescent boys came together with grief on their hearts, grieving their mothers, grieving tremendous loss, and wrote these songs that today still lift us into love. And Paul McCartney has said in many interviews that his departed mother has always been his muse, and that she inspired his best songs, from Let It Be to Lady Madonna to Yesterday. He says that whenever he was troubled, he would turn inward and connect to his departed mom. And John went through his own process of connecting, moving through his rage and his anger. And really, when you listen to his song, Imagine, that is so much about this higher perspective that we get when our hearts are broken wide open from grief. So they turned their grief, their pain, into beautiful love songs. So you could say that that's a call to all of us to turn our personal pain, our ego stories, our losses into unconditional love for the world. But I also want to tell you about the grand adventure and how that comes back to us now as a journey to love. Because as we talked about mountain climbing at the beginning of this, I want to share with you that in my 20s, I knew people who climbed Everest. And actually, it was always a discussion amongst my mountain climbing friends, like, oh, are you going to try to train for Everest this year? That was way back before you had a guide that you paid $1 million to and they carried your pack. This was back when climbers actually climbed Everest and actually carried their packs. And they would all talk about, you know, in Tibetan, Everest, the name for Mount Everest is, I'll remember it just a second, Holy Mother. Holy Mother. Of course, it's in Tibetan. I won't try to say that name because I'll butcher it, but the name for Everest is Holy Mother. And when they would go to climb Everest, they would do pujas, all these Hindu ceremonies of asking the Divine Mother to protect them and give them passage on the mountain. So they would go on the great external adventure of climbing Everest, and then they would have to stop and go on the internal adventure of embracing the Holy Mother as their guide in the climb. Now, I also know that those people who did survive Everest, I know two who actually summited, they get the process of the outer adventure strips away ego, strips away personality. It strips them bare. They go out on the great physical adventure of climbing the world's tallest peak, and they end up coming home stripped wide open. And what do you think they say? They say, I realized none of it matters. All I cared about was getting home to the people I love. And if you met them, like I would see them in person a few weeks later, they looked different. They looked like they'd had a near-death experience and that they had reconnected with their holy divine essence. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, even if you only want to go on an external adventure and you don't want to turn inward, this life has a way of stripping you bare, no matter what adventure you go on, and returning you to your essence of divine love. So your homework for this week, and you can talk about it in your breakout rooms as well, is to, again, do that meditation where you pour that golden loving light through you and out to the world. And you go through the Christmas holidays with all of its stresses and its conflicts, remembering that you are the source of divine love, that you are the embodiment of the divine feminine goddess of compassion. Even if you're a man, you can imagine that. And so as you go through your holidays, basking in that love of divine compassion, you can build your little private, little sacred feminine shrine to meditate in and marinate in that unconditional love. You will find yourself forgiving and loving everywhere you go. You will find yourself being kind in traffic because you think it could be a grieving mom. So let's go on this grand Everest inner adventure together this Christmas and truly give birth to our Christ consciousness, truly embody the divine feminine deity energy of loving kindness. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you.